What's the great lesson of this whole period?
I would not have done Bear Stearns. I don't particularly trust the government like I might have back then.
It's beginning to look a lot like 2008. There's uncertainty in the air, banks are failing. Silvergate, Silicon Valley Bank, Signature, First Republic, Credit Suisse. I don't know how this is gonna end, but I do have a prediction. Jamie Dimon, the man who led JPMorgan through 2008 until today, will not buy SVB or any other failed bank. Why? Because he learned his lesson after 2008 when the government asked him for help and then screwed JPMorgan for it afterwards. Let's take a look at that first. An early sign of the 2008 financial crisis was the failure of Bear Stearns. Bear had huge losses from its bad mortgage investments, and by March of 2008 was completely illiquid. On the weekend of the failure, Bear Stearns asked the Federal Reserve for help, and the Fed shattered Jamie Dimon's weekend, begging him to save Bear Stearns.
Please, come save us.
No.
Please.
Fine. Dimon agreed, and Bear was bought for $2 a share, later being upped to $10 a share. Ooh, crisis averted. Just 6 months later, in September 2008, Washington Mutual, WaMu, failed from bad mortgage bets and was taken over by the FDIC. Scrambling to find a buyer for WaMu, they decided that if the Fed can ruin Jamie Dimon's weekends, so can they.
Come save us.
Do not call list.
Jamie, save us.
Fine. JPMorgan stepped in and bought Washington Mutual for $1.9 billion. In Jamie's eyes, he had done something good. He wasn't sure if it was a terrific business decision, but JPMorgan stepped in, not to make a profit, but because, quote, it's good for America. All right, I don't know if I fully buy that, but it wasn't a bad deal. The government got Jamie Dimon to do a bailout, and they had a partner that could, say, save SVB in 2023 if it were to fail. Jamie wanted to get paid though, so for just $3.25 billion investment, they got an additional $600 billion in assets, theoretically, and were expecting more than $1 billion a year in earnings, just from Bear. Life was good, or so they thought. Over the next few years, all major banks, including JPMorgan, were called in front of Congress to answer for the financial crisis, rightfully so. The problem for Jamie Dimon was that he was being blamed for all the financial tomfoolery that WaMu and Bear Stearns had done before JPMorgan bought them. He bought the banks as a favor for the government, and they turned around and yelled at him for being irresponsible and fined JPMorgan $19 billion. I'm all for bankers seeing consequences, but I can only imagine having to sit there thinking, my guy, you asked me to do this, and now you're yelling at me for doing it? Like if your buddy asks you to get him some Subway chili, then he yells at you for how bad it is. A, you asked me to do this. B, I didn't make the chili bad. It was already bad. Of the $19 billion JPMorgan was hit with, they claimed 70% of it was for what Bear Stearns and WaMu did before they bought them. JPMorgan definitely wasn't blameless here. That remaining 30% has to come from somewhere, but JPMorgan never would have bought them if the government didn't ask. That's kind of bogus. Because of that bamboozlement, the deal wasn't so sweet anymore, and Jamie Dimon even says that he regrets buying Bear and WaMu. He wouldn't do it again, and he can't trust the government.
What the lesson for CEOs in terms of dealing with the government in the future, you think is going to be what?
I wouldn't take their word.
I don't really blame him. They ask for a favor, he saves their butt, and they pull out the rug from under him. I don't feel too bad though, because the bank's rug pulled us during the crisis, so screw them. If they're struggling, they could just buy less avocado toast and get a second job. But the government didn't get away with it for very long, and now we're seeing the consequences of their betrayal. Silicon Valley Bank was taken over by the FDIC on Friday, March 10th. More than 2 weeks later, they haven't sold it yet. Compare this to 2008 when WaMu was taken over Friday by the FDIC. By Monday, it was owned by JPMorgan. Banks saw what happened to JPMorgan after doing the government a favor, and they don't want to be that guy. A majority of the big banks passed on the purchase, and I'd have to assume the FDIC is starting to get a little antsy holding SVB for so long. The FDIC was cocky right after the failure, assuming their weekend auction would close, so they rejected bids asking to split up parts of SVB. Now they're reopening the auction for a third time and saying they'll split it up. I think that's a good thing. Government feels a little pressure and has to eat some humble pie. Jamie Dimon hasn't completely given up on America though, and he led the charge for JPMorgan and 10 other banks to deposit $30 billion into First Republic, another failing bank. Remember, he's a banker, so there's no doubt he's looking for profit. There's a key difference here though. JPMorgan is just depositing money. They're not taking an ownership stake. Ownership got them screwed over last time, and they're trying to stay off the hook. The government burned a valuable bridge after 2008, one that saved their butts. Jamie Dimon never forgot, and the other bankers don't want it to be their turn. It won't be so easy for the government to sucker someone into a deal this time, under the guise of,
It's good for America. They're asking us to do it.
someone will have to buy SVB or its parts. I don't think it'll be Jamie Dimon. That's just my opinion. What do you guys think? Tell me in the comments.